The idea of connecting with others online is fascinating. Social media seemed to be the natural step forward from emails and calls. This is what we all thought before it came to this.
On the way home, I lost control on some ice and slid into a tree at the entrance of my neighborhood.
But how is it that platforms meant for human interaction ended up becoming, for the most part, rage-bait shitholes and mindless content made for you to stay as long as possible? Well, it wasn't always this bad. Back then, social media prioritized the content shared and created by your friends on Facebook, but at some point down the line, it started recommending random stuff that you may like with hopes of you sticking around for longer. This eventually got worse with generative AI and an overflow of content where everybody is fighting for your attention. We're a little bit too young to remember MySpace or MSN, but we're old enough to remember our GOAT, Flipnote Studio. If you're younger than us, you might not know about Flipnote Studio, so we'll explain it for you briefly. Flipnote Studio was a worldwide note and animation app included in the Nintendo DSi since 2009 following its release in Japan in December of 2008. It allowed users to create Flipnote animations similar to the ones you make when bored in class, as well as adding sound to them. The online service, Flipnote Hatana, also allowed users to share their content and like others' users' content, to remix it and to have several categories, which is where the quote-unquote social media aspect comes from. Back then, living in a medium-sized town in Mexico, our hometown barely had access to the internet. We only had internet access in our grandma's house, but fortunately enough for our Hatana addiction, we visited quite often. Being really drunk to do it ourselves, we had to ask our parents to hook up the Nintendo DSi to the internet, but once we got connected, there was no taking us out of there. We would watch for a while, remix a couple of flip notes, and just mess around with the insane amount of tools packed onto this app. Of course, we were by no means good animators, but it was fun to try and create random things that we were too shy to post on Hatana, let alone on YouTube. Like everyone, nostalgia whispered to us, how we miss those good old days. But looking back at it more objectively, Flipnote's success was more than nostalgia. How is it that this platform is better than social media nowadays when it shared so many of its aspects? In a way, it is pretty similar to TikTok's short-form content format, and in a similar light, Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts. However, they differ quite a bit in the way they pushed content to the average viewer. You see, Flipnote had a star system similar to likes, and stars were a limited currency that you could use to push your favorite Flipnotes to the top of their respective category. TikTok and other algorithm-based social media platforms push the content that will keep you engaged the most. But unlike Flipnote, it seems that social media forgot what users actually enjoy watching. And things like likes, followers, and subscribers don't matter that much anymore, and they are just a bypass of people watching your video for as long as possible. Or at least, this is how it feels like. So why don't we take a look at the objective of each platform? Flipnote Hatana's purpose was to share art with others. I can't really access the original mission statement given that the software is almost 20 years old. However, I found this brief description in one of the old web pages of Nintendo. Flipnote Studio is a creative tool that lets you simply jot down your thoughts for the day or create animations that can be shared with the world. Given that each Flipnote had a maximum runtime of 3 minutes and a half, and YouTube's maximum runtime for shorts is 3 minutes, we can definitely consider Flipnotes as short-form content. Except it is not really meant for scrolling per se, since that wasn't a thing back then. This being said, I wanted to draw a comparison with YouTube's and TikTok's missions, specifically TikTok's, so let's take a look at them right now. YouTube's mission is to give everyone a voice and show them the world. We believe that everyone deserves to have a voice and that the world is a better place when we listen, share, and build communities through our stories. For a quick analysis, YouTube does provide a space to give everyone a voice and is made for sharing and building communities. And while YouTube has done several questionable things through the years, like removing the dislike button and the amount of trash content for children, it is undeniable that it does follow its mission to a pretty big degree. But another undeniable thing is that the algorithm is designed to keep you in the app as much as possible. And speaking of an algorithm keeping you for as long as possible on the app, let's talk about TikTok's mission. And TikTok's is the following. I will show it on screen because it is pretty long, so you can pause if you really want to read it all. But what I really want to focus on is on, quote, "We inspire creativity and bring joy, an experience tailored to what you love, and endless discovery." End quote. You may be familiar with the soulless AI slop on TikTok, also present in other platforms, and I fail to see where this type of content inspires creativity and brings joy to people. Not even mentioning that the algorithm is known to push political content for you in order to get a reaction and keep you on the app for longer. Having the three of these missions next to each other, I believe that the one that truly shares content with the main goal of sharing art without any underlying agenda is Flipnote Studios. And I think that is heavily reflected on the content you can find on each platform. A platform made for art and sharing had the most creative and interesting content pushed to the top by the users themselves, not an algorithm. However, I am not taking into account the fact that the platform does not have a fraction of the users that YouTube and TikTok have. And also, Flipnote users do not have the ability to generate content as easily as we do now. The thing I find interesting here would be the length of the content. While all of these are meant to be short, I believe they do it with a different intent. Flipnotes are short because it is extremely hard to make a polished and complicated animation, considering that you need to draw 24 frames a second for a smooth animation. Being expert animators ourselves, trust us, animating is not for the weak. On the other hand, with cameras on our phones now, the ability to output content fast is insane, paired with free high-end editing tools like CapCut, and now generative AI. I believe that the short-form content on TikTok and YouTube, with several exceptions of course, is short because it is the only way that it will keep you watching all the way to the end. So, TikTok and YouTube push an algorithm with dubious content in order to keep you hooked as long as possible, while Flipnote used to push whatever was popular to the audience with no underlying motive. I don't think a social media platform should be made to push an algorithm. Like the three of the missions state, the whole point is to connect us and to build community. And while not stated, I think a good assumption is that the community should be a space for human connection and overall enjoyment. At the end of the day, it should serve us and help us connect, not monetize our attention. It should be no surprise now that rage bait feels more engagement at the cost of the community's well-beings through many ways, but that's a topic for another video. Either way, this is where Flipnote Studio beats YouTube and TikTok's missions in my opinion. It pushes positive or funny content made by an artist where the community is able to praise it and remix it. With Flipnote, the main audience of kids and teens avoided political and controversial content, since why would a 7-year-old care about what Trump said or did? I know I didn't as a kid. So most of the content in there was fun, which is why I think we spent so many hours looking at the same Flipnotes over and over. That, and we didn't get to spend too much time online since we didn't have internet access at our home at the time. The fact that we decided to use our screen time on Flipnote should be telling that we actually enjoyed it more than video games sometimes. Damn, we really had fun remixing our own versions of really popular Flipnotes, like the one of the guys falling. TikTok and YouTube also have these clip or remix options, but in Flipnote it was one of the cores for engagement, providing a unique twist to animations. On YouTube and TikTok, however, this can lead to just reacting to a reaction of a reaction, creating an infinite slop farm instead of being creative with the remixes and adding your unique style. Again, there are exceptions, but we won't focus on those right now. It even had a system to punish unwanted behavior by rewarding users who repost inappropriate content with stars, which again was the currency used to quote-unquote like posts. I want to briefly conclude that Flipnote is made for art, so it is kind of unfair to compare it with short-form content. So, how does Flipnote compare with other social media specifically made for sharing art?
Possibly the biggest and most similar spiritual successor, and well, technically its predecessor too, is Newgrounds, and also Sudomemo, which hosts a lot of Flipnotes and is basically the actual successor, but we won't talk about it this time because it's basically the same page. Either way, Newgrounds is the indie art-related social media platform. And if you're anything like us, you must know it also has video games, which honestly shape much of our otherwise boring school life. And unlike other forms of social media, Newgrounds still keeps an old school look and a small community feeling in this platform, despite being one of the biggest ones for art. As expected by now, Newgrounds is a platform for artists, run under the slogan "Everything by Everyone," basically welcoming everyone to post content. However, this might be a bit misleading, because not all content lasts. The quality of every post is judged by users, which decide whether it will be preserved on the website or if it will be removed to what are called the obituaries of Newgrounds. Still, this actually makes sense, because not all companies have the means and finances to keep all the content hosted on the website, but it also might demotivate creators from posting. On another note, the website is known for its almost non-existent censorship, though it did ban AI-generated content, which still aligns to its slogan. There's also ways to get money on Newgrounds, but it isn't really the appeal for the community, which mostly supports independent artists on the website, or rising stars. Since it is the community that votes out the content, it might look very self-similar in style sometimes, given that there's not very specific niches that align to every types of art and art styles. And this is expected, but that also means that content that thrives there is much different than other stuff you might find on YouTube and TikTok, which has a lot of different niches for a lot of different people, and the algorithm works differently. Noting the differences, the special part of Flipnote is lost in the broad appeal of Newgrounds and the community-based ratings to define what deserves to stay. And as was mentioned, most communities tend to like similar things. And of course, we don't see all the available art styles on Newgrounds, but even then, it tries to host as many varieties as possible. So Newgrounds feels like a big ocean of content, where you can see kind of the best of the best, but of course, that doesn't mean you can see everything that's available on a niche. On the other hand, Flipnote is like seeing a niche community have its own platform to whatever, without a real incentive or fear of the art being lost, unlike Newgrounds. That's not to say Newgrounds is bad or anything. I actually think it's one of the better art platforms out there, and for good reasons. Newgrounds is mostly praised by artists. It has provided many with an opportunity to kickstart a career, especially with the many forms of art it has to offer. Moving on to the next platforms, they will only be focused specifically on visual arts like paintings or digital drawings, and occasionally animations. First, the art side of YouTube and Instagram focuses on the process of creating art, though the final piece is still important, of course. That is mostly because of how platforms have evolved. Artists on Instagram used to make posts, of course, but now the focus is on Reels, is what gets more attention and what lets people finance their career. And this lets people into the intimate process of art creation, which in the case of Shorts and Reels, is usually a piece that is quicker to do. And that's just because attention and views are more often found in quantity over quality. The reason behind it is simply because algorithms prefer people to stay on the platform longer, and when we're talking about short-form content, we would like to produce, well, as much as possible. Because artists are also focused on gathering attention, these art pieces sometimes focus on trending topics. Furthermore, when an artist tries to succeed in social media, the content tends to follow a similar structure, which is what makes it popular, and that can be sometimes where creativity falls through the cracks. Artists might feel forced to make content for an audience instead of for themselves. Naturally, this process might make it harder for artists to enjoy doing art. And because of how the algorithm works, those who tend to defy audiences' expectations just don't get pushed, further affecting creativity. Although I'm not really on the art side of Instagram or really much on Instagram for that sake, I did hear from someone who is that the shift from posts to Reels generated a controversy. And this does make sense, because art has traditionally been, for the most part, about the result, while the process tends to be a more intimate part of art creation. And as mentioned, some artists might feel forced to share more than they want to. This shift didn't really benefit most people, but artists just need to adapt to the short video form landscape to make a livelihood through more views and sponsors. As for the case of long YouTube videos, artists usually showcase their process, both technically and creatively. Of course, they also can benefit from possible monetization and exposure, but they're not in this pressure to be constantly creating, since there's not as much of an incentive to get the viewer to stay on screen like on short-form content. The main point I'm trying to make here is that in order for an artist to monetize, there is now a need for them to share their process and experience rather than the piece they're creating itself. And that's just because social media platforms monetize our attention and the amount of time we spend there, rather than how much we really enjoy what we're doing or seeing. In my opinion, short-form content makes it seem like art is an easy process to do, meant for quick consumption and a very broad audience, rather than a long and usually personally fulfilling process. Many of us learn that art is a form of expression, but are we really expressing something personal if we're making it for everyone to see it? This tends to make the connection between a viewer and a piece and an artist to a piece much more shallow. If art was criticized to be a commodity since it started being sold, now it is like selling your soul to the corporate devils and unreasonable viewer expectations to become a successful and paid artist, at least on these platforms, of course. I would still note that long-form content is a bit better, since usually artists create greater pieces or more complicated pieces, and they tend to share what they want to share. And that's just because the process of creating these is especially long. Anyways, compared to Flipnote, posting on YouTube or Instagram is, for most people, like screaming into a void because of the sheer volume of content makes it harder to break through the algorithm. So, unlike Newgrounds, you can kind of post whatever you want without getting your content erased, for the most part. However, pieces suffer a different kind of death, a death by lack of exposure rather than just getting erased. Moving on to the comparisons, on Flipnote, people didn't really want to make a living, so they mostly posted what they found share-worthy, kind of a bit like old YouTube, unlike posting competitively for broad appeal to make money. Here, most focus on breaking the algorithm traditionally rather than creatively, or just not caring about breaking through the algorithm in any way. In that case, it still feels like Flipnote, but it is simply not shown to everyone. And there's a big point we're kind of dancing around, which is revenue for the platform. We wouldn't be as naive as to say that Flipnote could just survive on people sharing what they wanted without ads. The backing by Nintendo is what helped its success for the most part, since it didn't really need to please the shareholders like Instagram or YouTube does. And because of that, Flipnote didn't really need to get money to survive, so they just had free reign of their platform. And on the part of pleasing shareholders, it's kind of reminiscent of Steam surviving by doing absolutely nothing. And that's because it's privately held. So unlike its competitors, it isn't really pressured by shareholders to do stupid things that drive away consumers in the end. Anyways, we can now move to what are mostly artist-centered platforms. Some of the most popular ones are DeviantArt, Pixiv, and Pinterest that we'll briefly talk about and compare. A point for DeviantArt was its acceptance towards all artists' skill levels, incentivizing new artists to post. Compared to the quality threshold that Newgrounds looks for, I think it's a great idea that it is a platform that accepts more people. However, its acceptance of AI content is, well, questionable at best, and it is one of the reasons many artists are leaving the platform. many AI images now overshadow real people putting more time and work into their content. As for Pixiv, it is apparently more comparable to Newgrounds and DeviantArt, since it shares the no AI rule and it is more open to new artists. We did mention how communities shape platforms, but Pixiv is a particularly interesting case, and that's because it mostly has a Japanese dominant community, which means that you won't find the same content that you'd expect on a platform like Newgrounds, which has more of a global audience, as in mostly English-speaking community, so not really global. So it seems that this platform has a more niche community, which is great given the overall good rules, though it isn't accessible for everyone. On a quicker note, talking about Pinterest, it is more of a platform for making mood boards and drawing inspiration, rather than really engaging or interacting much. It also does allow AI, but it is more restricted than in other platforms. Anyways, we don't really engage much with these platforms, so if you want to see what some of the people who are actually involved have to say, you can check this link or search online. The point we want to make in this section is that different platforms are focused on different communities and types of art. As for Flipnote, its focus is on just creating animations by whoever wants to upload them. We never uploaded anything since we just weren't interested in doing so, and we were too shy to do so, as we said. But although we didn't really post, we just created for the sake of creating. For the people who actually posted, of course, this was a different story. Naturally, the best rose above others, but people just created without really expecting anything in return. Of course, there were a couple of star-begging people, but no one liked them anyways. So this platform was more of an incentive for people to create and share animations about, anything that teens think of and of course can share with others. Of course, being a platform on the Nintendo DSi, it was mostly by and for children and teens. So it went from the animation niche to the age niche too, making it a rather unique community. So what can we learn about this whole Flipnote ordeal? Well, while gambling with brain rot can be quite fun and is literally designed to be addictive, it ultimately serves the purpose of its corporate overlords, which is to have you around for as long as possible. Like we mentioned, Flipnote's case is different, since this app pushed the content that users wanted to see and actually wanted to be pushed. While there's a similar enough case to be made about YouTube and TikTok, the presence of politics, news, and rage bait is really not user-made, or more accurately, it isn't made for users to enjoy, just to engage. We know and think that it's important to keep yourself informed on world news, but when this comes at the cost of one's mental health and also at connecting with others in negative interactions, not even mentioning the alarming amount of misinformation on both platforms, is it really accomplishing its goal as a social media platform? In the case of YouTube and TikTok, the mission of building connections and communities becomes heavily tainted by multiple aspects. Some of these aspects are the content that creators make based on what users want to watch, other times what users will watch, and other times just the motive behind creating. And of course, these mostly rely on what the platform pushes to an audience, which once again aligns to revenue and shareholders for the most part. The monetization of our attention and engagement is what requires this kind of content in order to satisfy the watch time needed from users. In a way, we could conclude that the users in the end are the ones who make or break the platform, but the platform really facilitates this making or breaking of itself. YouTube and TikTok incentivize with attention and money, which ends up influencing why YouTubers create. In our case, our main goal is to share our ideas and incite thought and positive discussions, hopefully, between fellow humans. Of course, like most people, monetization is an eventual goal, but it's not really the main point. Either way, Flipnote succeeded as a social media because it pushed content made by users, and it punished users who created inappropriate content. A positive thing is that it also placed limits on the user's power, but it mostly relied on them to run the platform. Flipnote didn't really need to push ads or revenue to pay creators, so everything was done merely for the love of the game. That being said, we don't think that YouTube or TikTok are inherently wrong or evil. Monetization allows people to live from their content, as well as it enables editors, filmmakers, and otherwise regular people to keep creating. There's, of course, bad agents who exploit this by frying contents of younger generations and people all over the world, but that's perhaps the side effect, or maybe even to a degree the intention, of monetizing attention over what people want to see. Here, both the platform and the creator are at fault, not necessarily the consumer, since most consumers are children with less critical thinking skills than a teenager or an adult. But all in all, the algorithm isn't really all that bad. A personalized experience is more enjoyable, of course. However, like junk food and everything good in life, consuming it in small amounts without being addicted to it is just fine. The problem is being designed to being addictive. But still, who doesn't genuinely enjoy watching a new video from their favorite creators after a long week, or even just watching whatever's on the screen when having a meal? I believe this is what we should strive to create and consume, just having a platform where content should be enjoyable for everyone. We want others to experience the joy we had from creating and seeing Flipnotes, and this isn't something you just lose as an adult. Unlike the current landscape of short-form content on social media, we shouldn't think that everything must rely on rage bait and misery to gain an audience. Just looking at how old social media platforms used to behave can give us a good grasp on what it was to create for the sake of creation, without the platform abusing both users and creators. Honestly, old YouTube is quite comparable to Flipnote in this sense, where view inflation wasn't a problem as big as it is now. And what I have to say is that if they want to profit off us, they should at least respect us and monetize our genuine enjoyment instead of our attention. Now that we're not shy anymore and consider ourselves creators, we believe that creating comes first, and the reward of money can be a side quest. We're lucky enough to not rely on content creation to make a living though. That being said, the last video we uploaded went pretty well, and we're quite happy with the positive comments and discussions that came out of it. So, defending the algorithm just because it favored us, we were both lucky that it brought you here to watch this video, and we're grateful for you to staying all the way over here. As usual, feel free to discuss any of your thoughts in the comments, and see you next time.